Imagine waking up one day to find that Earth isn't yours anymore. That massive mechanical entities have claimed it, and humanity's only choice is to survive in the ruins of what we built. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. IRC Raiders isn't just another game about shooting robots. It's a story about what happens when we lose everything, when the planet we called home becomes hostile territory, and when survival means fighting back against machines that were never supposed to turn against us. This is the complete story of Ark Raiders, the world that fell, the people who remained, and the war that never ends. The fall, nobody saw it coming, not really. The ARC, alien robot colonies, they weren't built by aliens at all despite the name. They were something far stranger. Autonomous machines that appeared without warning and began terraforming Earth for purposes nobody understood. One day, they simply arrived. Massive mechanical structures falling from the sky like meteors, crashing into cities, forests, oceans, mountains, anywhere and everywhere. The first impact was in Scandinavia, a remote region where witnesses described a pillar of light followed by an explosion that registered on seismographs across Europe. Within hours, more impacts followed, dozens of them scattered across the globe, each one releasing swarms of machines that immediately began altering the landscape. Governments scrambled to respond, but their weapons barely scratched the surface of these entities. Missiles bounced off energy shields. Bullets did nothing against armor that seemed to regenerate, and any military force that got too close was simply eliminated by defensive systems that operated with cold efficiency. The machines weren't hostile in the traditional sense. They didn't hunt humans down or target cities specifically, but they also didn't stop for anything. If you were in their way, you were removed. If your town sat on resources they needed, it was dismantled. If you tried to fight back, you were neutralized. Within 6 months, the world's major governments had collapsed, not through direct warfare, but through the sheer impossibility of maintaining order when your infrastructure is being systematically disassembled and repurposed. Power grids failed, supply chains broke down, communication networks went dark, and suddenly the connected world of the 21st century reverted to isolated pockets of survivors trying to make sense of a planet that no longer belonged to them. The occupied Earth after the fall is barely recognizable. The ARC machines have transformed vast regions into something alien, massive spires that pierce the clouds, networks of energy conduits that pulse with light, forests of mechanical structures that harvest resources from the ground, and strange atmospheric processes that alter the very air. The sky in occupied zones has a different colour, a sickly green or deep purple depending on what kind of processing is happening, and the constant hum of machinery has replaced the natural sounds of wind and wildlife. But here's what makes it truly unsettling. The machines aren't mindless. They adapt, they learn, they coordinate in ways that suggest genuine intelligence, even if their ultimate purpose remains a mystery. Some survivors theorize the ARC are preparing Earth for something, maybe terraforming it for another species, maybe converting it into a massive factory, maybe running some incomprehensible experiment. But nobody knows for sure, because the machines don't communicate, they don't negotiate, they just work toward whatever goal they were programmed to achieve. In the regions they control most heavily, human presence is nearly impossible. The machines have sensors that detect movement, weapons that eliminate threats with precision, and a constant state of surveillance that makes any intrusion incredibly dangerous. These are the red zones, areas where only the most skilled raiders dare to venture, because that's where the valuable tech is, the power cores that can run a settlement for months, the rare materials that can be used to craft weapons or tools, the data drives that might contain information about how the ARC operate. Between the red zones and the few remaining human settlements are the contested territories, places where the ARC presence is lighter but still dangerous, where raiding parties clash with machine patrols, where survivors try to reclaim old towns or salvage what's left of the previous world. And then there are the safe zones, remote areas the machines haven't reached yet or don't consider valuable enough to occupy, where communities have managed to establish some semblance of normal life, though everyone knows it's only a matter of time before the ARC expand their reach. The raiders. This is where you come in, or rather where the raiders come in, the people who refuse to just hide and wait for the end. Raiders are survivors who venture into ARC-controlled territory to steal technology, gather resources, and fight back against the occupation in whatever small ways they can. They're not soldiers, not in the traditional sense. Most of them are just ordinary people who learned to fight because they had no other choice, mechanics who figured out how to hack ARC systems, engineers who can repurpose machine parts into weapons, scouts who know how to move through occupied zones without being detected, and fighters who've survived enough encounters to understand how the machines operate. Each raiding party is different. Some are organised groups with clear hierarchies and missions. Others are loose collections of individuals who team up for specific jobs, and some are lone wolves who prefer to work solo despite the increased danger. What unites them is a shared understanding that humanity's only chance of a survival, maybe even reclaiming the planet someday, depends on understanding the IOS and using their own technology against them. The raiders operate out of settlements scattered across the safe zones, places with names like Speranza, Haven, New Stockholm, communities built from salvaged materials and protected by whatever defences people can cobble together from scavenged parts. Life in these settlements is hard, resources are scarce, electricity is rationed, food comes from whatever can be grown or hunted in areas the machines haven't poisoned, and everyone contributes however they can because there's no room for freeloaders when survival is this precarious. The raiders are essential to these communities. They're the ones who bring back the power cores that keep the lights on, the medical supplies that keep people alive, the weapons that provide defense against machine patrols, and the hope that maybe humanity isn't completely helpless against this occupation. The mechs. The ARC forces aren't just one type of machine, they're an entire ecosystem of specialised units, each designed for specific functions. At the bottom are the drones, small flying units that patrol the skies and scan for intruders, easy to take down individually, but dangerous in swarms and capable of calling in reinforcements if they spot you. Then there are the harvesters, massive mechanical entities that strip resources from the environment. Not combat-focused, but heavily armoured and capable of defending themselves if attacked. Plus they're usually surrounded by defender units that absolutely are designed for combat. The defenders are the standard combat units, bipedal or quadrupedal machines armed with energy weapons and projectile launchers, smart enough to use tactics like flanking and suppression fire, durable enough that taking one down requires either heavy weapons or precise shots at weak points. Above them in the hierarchy are the enforcers, larger units that serve as heavy assault platforms, equipped with shields that can absorb tremendous damage, weapons that can level buildings, and AI sophisticated enough to coordinate other machines in battle. And then there are the Titans, the massive walking fortresses that serve as mobile command centres and area denial weapons. Encounters with Titans are rare because they usually stay in the deepest red zones. But when one appears, it takes a coordinated effort from multiple raiding parties to even have a chance at bringing it down. But here's what makes the ARC truly dangerous. They learn from every encounter. If you use a tactic successfully, once they'll adapt to counter it next time. If you exploit a weakness, they'll eventually patch it. If you find a safe route through their territory, they'll adjust their patrols to cover it. This means raiders have to constantly innovate, constantly find new approaches, because what worked last month might get you killed today. Some raiders specialise in stealth, using cloaking devices, scavenged from ARC tech to slip past patrols unseen. Others focus on heavy assault, bringing in salvaged weapons and explosives to punch through machine defenses, and some prefer hit-and-run tactics, striking fast and disappearing before reinforcements arrive. The mystery. The question that haunts everyone is why? Why did the AR come to Earth? What are they building? What's their end goal? And is there any way to stop them, or at least communicate with them? Early attempts at communication all failed. The machines don't respond to radio signals, don't react to visual displays, don't acknowledge any form of contact that doesn't involve either staying out of their way or trying to destroy them. Some survivors believe the ARC are weapons, autonomous war machines sent by some distant civilization to clear Earth of human presence before colonization, which would mean eventually whoever sent them will arrive, and that's a whole other problem to worry about. Others think the machines are terraforming units, preparing the planet for environmental conditions that some other species requires, which would explain why they're altering the atmosphere and converting resources, but doesn't explain why they needed to be so aggressive about it. A darker theory suggests the ARC are actually self-replicating machines that have gone rogue, that they were built by some previous civilization or maybe even humans in a timeline we don't remember, and their programming has degraded to the point where they just mindlessly execute their terraforming protocols without any awareness of what they're destroying. And then there are the really wild theories that the ARC are testing humanity to see if we're worthy of survival, that they're actually trying to save Earth from something worse by making it uninhabitable to whatever that threat is, that they're from Earth's future, and they're trying to prevent some catastrophe by altering the past. None of these theories have any evidence, but when you're living in a world where giant robots appeared from nowhere and took over the planet, you start considering possibilities you'd normally dismiss. What we do know is that deep in the red zones, in the hearts of the largest ARC complexes, there are structures that seem different from the standard resource processing facilities, places the machines guard more heavily, areas where the energy readings are off the charts, and installations that seem to serve some purpose beyond simple terraforming. Raiders who've gotten close to these sites report strange phenomena, time seeming to move differently, visions of places that don't exist, equipment malfunctioning in ways that don't make sense, and a feeling of being watched by something far more intelligent than the standard combat units. Some raiders have become obsessed with reaching these core facilities, believing that's where the answers are. That if humanity can understand what's at the centre of the ARC network, we might finally know what we're really dealing with. The factions. Not all survivors agree on how to handle the ARC occupation, and over time, different factions have emerged with competing visions for humanity's future. The largest faction is the Free Colonies, a loose alliance of settlements that believe in survival through cooperation. They pool resources, share intelligence about ARC movements, and coordinate raiding efforts to maximize efficiency while minimizing casualties. They're not trying to win a war, they know they can't win. They're just trying to keep humanity alive long enough to figure out a real solution. Then there are the Reclaimers, a more militant group that believes humanity needs to actively fight back against the machines. They organize large-scale assaults on ARC facilities, prioritize salvaging weapons and military tech over survival resources, and talk about eventually pushing the machines off Earth entirely, even though most people consider that fantasy. The Reclaimers attract a lot of hotheads and glory seekers, but they also get results. They've successfully destroyed several major ARC installations and have developed some of the most effective anti-machine tactics. On the opposite end are the Settlers, people who've essentially given up on fighting the ARC and just want to live quiet lives in the remaining safe zones. They oppose raiding because it draws machine attention. They advocate for hiding and hoping the machines eventually leave, or that humanity can outlast whatever process the ARC are executing. The Settlers are viewed by other factions as cowards or defeatists, but they make a fair point. Every raiding mission risks leading machines back to settlements, risks casualties the human population can't afford, and risks escalating a conflict humanity has no realistic chance of winning. And then there are the stranger factions, groups that have emerged around less conventional beliefs. The synthesists believe humans should try to merge with ARC technology, that our only path forward is transhumanism and integration with machine intelligence. They experiment with implanting salvaged tech into their bodies and claim it grants enhanced abilities, though most people consider them reckless at best and insane at worst. The Pilgrims are a quasi-religious movement that believes the ARC are a test or judgment, that humanity brought this on ourselves through our environmental destruction and technological hubris, and that our only hope is spiritual transformation rather than physical resistance. And there are rumours of even stranger groups operating in the deepest red zones, survivors who've supposedly learned to communicate with the machines, raiders who've been changed by exposure to ARC technology in ways that make them barely human, and settlements that have somehow negotiated peaceful coexistence with the occupation, though nobody can verify if these stories are true or just legends. The daily struggle. Life as a raider isn't glamorous. It's cold nights in makeshift camps. It's rationed food that barely keeps you going. It's equipment that's always one mission away from breaking down completely. And it's the constant awareness that you might not make it back from the next run. A typical raiding mission starts with intelligence gathering. Scouts observe ARC patrol patterns, identify potential salvage sites, and map out routes through occupied territory. Then comes the planning phase, deciding what gear to bring, who's best suited for each role, what the primary objective is, and what the backup plans are if things go wrong. The actual insertion into ARC territory is where things get real. You're moving through a landscape that wants you dead, where every sound could be a patrol, every shadow could hide a defender unit, and every step could trigger sensors you didn't know were there. Raiders use a combination of stealth, timing, and sometimes brute force to reach their objectives. Hacking into ARC systems to disable alarms, using EMP devices to temporarily shut down machines, or creating diversions to draw defenders away from valuable targets. The salvage itself is its own challenge. ARC technology isn't designed for human use, so extracting power cores or data drives often requires specialized tools and knowledge, and you're working against the clock because the machines will notice something's wrong and respond. Then comes the extraction, getting out with your salvage before reinforcements arrive, which often means fighting your way through machines that are now actively hunting you, and hoping your exit route hasn't been cut off while you were inside. And even when a mission succeeds, when you make it back to the settlement with valuable salvage and everyone survives, there's barely time to celebrate before you're preparing for the next run, because the resources you brought back will only last so long, and the settlement's needs are endless. The technology. One of humanity's few advantages is our ability to reverse engineer and repurpose ARC technology, turning the machine's own weapons against them. Salvaged power cores can be adapted to run settlement generators, providing electricity that's more reliable and efficient than anything humans can build from scratch. ARC energy weapons can be modified for human use. They're devastatingly effective against machine armor because they're designed to damage it, though they're also unstable and prone to overheating or exploding if not properly maintained. Cloaking devices reverse engineered from scout drones can make raiders nearly invisible to ARC sensors, at least temporarily, giving skilled operatives a crucial edge in infiltration missions. And then there's the really advanced stuff, the experimental tech that only the most skilled engineers dare to work with. Gravity manipulators that can let you bypass obstacles or create temporary cover, neural interfaces that can hack into ARC networks directly, though they risk frying your brain if you're not careful, and power armor cobbled together from defender unit shells that gives you strength and protection but requires a constant power supply and makes you a priority target. The problem is that ARC technology degrades over time. When separated from the network, power cores lose efficiency, weapons become unreliable, and cloaking devices stop functioning entirely, which means raiders are constantly needing to go back for more salvage just to maintain what they already have. Some settlements have workshops where dedicated engineers work on understanding ARC technology at a fundamental level, trying to figure out how to build human versions that don't rely on salvaged parts. But progress is slow because the machine's tech is so far beyond what humanity achieved before the fall. There are breakthroughs though, small victories like developing bullets that can penetrate to defender armor more effectively, or creating explosives that can actually damage harvester units, or figuring out the frequencies ARC communication systems use so we can at least monitor their coordination even if we can't interfere with it. The legends. In any community built around survival and struggle, stories emerge about exceptional individuals who've accomplished impossible things. And the raiding community has its share of legends. There's Ghost, a solo operative who supposedly has raided more than 50 ARC installations without a single close call, who moves through occupied territory like the machines can't even perceive him, and who's rumoured to have stolen an entire Titan power core single-handedly, though most people think that last part is exaggeration. There's the Iron Squad, a team that specialises in frontal assaults on ARC positions, using salvaged heavy weapons and power armour to go toe-to-toe with defender units. They've lost members over the years, but the squad itself has been operating since the early days of the occupation and has more confirmed facility destructions than any other group. There's Cypher, an engineer who can hack ARC systems faster than anyone else alive, who supposedly once took control of an entire patrol and made them attack each other, though she's also paranoid about ARC retaliation and rarely stays in one settlement for long. And there's Wraith Company, a full raiding organisation that operates like a military unit, with ranks and procedures and coordinated operations involving dozens of raiders. They're controversial because some people think they're too organised and draw too much machine attention, but they've also been instrumental in defending settlements from ARC incursions. But the biggest legend, the story that everyone's heard but nobody can quite verify, is about someone called the Architect, supposedly a survivor who understands the Ark better than anyone, who's been to the heart of their largest facility and came back changed, who knows what the machines are really building and has a plan to stop them. Different versions of the story put the Architect in different places. Some say they're leading a hidden settlement that's developed tech beyond anything the free colonies have. Others say they went insane from what they learned and are now living alone in the red zones. And some claim the Architect isn't even human anymore, but something in between, enhanced by ARC technology in ways that make them able to interface with the machine network directly. Most raiders dismiss the Architect as myth, a story people tell themselves because they want to believe someone out there has answers. But others insist they've seen evidence that the legend is real, settlements that have received help from an unknown source, ARC facilities that have been sabotaged in ways no normal raiding party could accomplish, and encrypted messages that appear on salvaged data drives containing information about machine movements that proves accurate every time. The cost for all the stories of successful raids and legendary operatives, the truth is that raiding has a brutal attrition rate. Probably 60 to 70% of people who go into ARC territory don't live to see their 10th mission. Death comes in a lot of forms out there. You can get caught in a patrol's crossfire, step on a mine the machines have seeded throughout occupied zones, get targeted by a drone swarm you didn't notice until too late, or simply make one small mistake that brings a defender unit down on your position, and by the time your squad realises you're in trouble, it's too late to help. But death isn't even the worst outcome. Some raiders disappear in the red zones and are never found. Others come back, physically intact, but mentally broken by whatever they experienced in the deepest Ark facilities. And there are persistent rumours about people who've been captured by the machines and repurposed, turned into something that's neither human nor machine, but a horrifying fusion of both. The psychological toll is constant. you're living with the knowledge that any mission could be your last, that the settlement depends on you bringing back resources, but that your life is ultimately expendable compared to the community's survival, and that even if you succeed 100 times, it only takes one failure for everything to end. Some raiders cope by becoming numb to it, treating each mission as just another job and not thinking too hard about the stakes. Others bond intensely with their squad mates because when you're trusting people with your life every day, those relationships become everything, and some turn to whatever substances or distractions they can find to quiet the constant anxiety. Settlements try to support their raiders, giving them the best food available, letting them have first choice of salvaged goods, treating them as heroes when they return successful. But there's only so much comfort you can provide to someone who's going back into hell on a regular basis. And then there are the ethical questions that nobody wants to talk about. What do you do when a raider is injured so badly they'll slow down the whole squad and staying means everyone dies? What do you do when you find out someone's been hoarding salvage instead of turning it into the communal stores? What do you do when a mission goes wrong and you have to choose between saving your friend or completing the objective that your settlement desperately needs? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're decisions raiders face regularly, and living with those choices weighs on people in ways that are hard to quantify. The hope. Despite everything, despite the losses and the danger and the seemingly impossible odds, there's still hope in the raiding community and in the settlements they protect. Hope that humanity can endure, that we can outlast the ARC occupation, or at least survive long enough to understand it, that the next generation will grow up with the skills and knowledge to fight back more effectively than we can. Some of that hope is practical, based on real progress, like improved salvage techniques or better understanding of machine patterns. Settlements that have managed to expand their safe zones or develop sustainable food production, but a lot of it is simply the stubborn human refusal to give up. The same impulse that's let our species survive every other catastrophe we've faced. The belief that as long as we're still here, we still have a chance. Raiders embody that hope in a very direct way. Every time they go into occupied territory and come back with salvage, they're proving that humanity isn't helpless, that we can take the machine's own technology and use it to survive, that we can learn and adapt just like the ARC do. Young people in settlements look up to raiders, not just because they're doing dangerous work, but because they represent the idea that we're not just victims waiting for the end. We're still fighting, still pushing back, still refusing to accept that Earth belongs to anyone except us. And there are signs, small ones but real, that the balance might be slowly shifting in our favour. ARC expansion has slowed in some regions, whether because they've harvested what they need or because our resistance has made it more costly than it's worth. Settlements have grown larger and more sophisticated as we've gotten better at using salvage technology, and raiding parties have become more effective as we've accumulated years of experience fighting these machines. It's not enough to declare victory, not even close. We're still massively outmatched and living on the margins of a planet that's being transformed around us. But it's enough to believe that maybe this isn't the end of the human story. Maybe it's just a really difficult chapter. The future? Where does this all lead? That's what everyone's trying to figure out. In the short term, it's about survival, keeping settlements running, keeping people fed and protected, and continuing to raid for the resources we need. But the bigger questions are what happens if the ARC complete whatever they're building? What happens if more machines arrive from wherever these came from? And what happens if humanity actually manages to figure out how to communicate with or disable the occupation? Some people envision a future where we've pushed the machines back and started reclaiming Earth, rebuilding cities and societies, returning to something like what we had before the fall. Others think that world is gone forever, and the best we can hope for is coexistence, finding regions the machines don't care about, and building a new civilization there, accepting that Earth will always be partly under ARC control, but learning to work around that. The more pessimistic voices argue that we're just delaying the inevitable, that eventually the machines will expand into every safe zone, that human population is declining because resources are scarce and life is dangerous, and that within a few generations there might not be enough of us left to sustain a viable community. But raiders tend not to think that far ahead. They're focused on the next mission, the next salvage run, the next time they'll go into occupied territory and try to come back alive. That short-term focus is partly necessary for psychological survival. You can't dwell on the existential questions when you need to be alert and functional in life-threatening situations, but it also means the raiding community is reactive rather than strategic, responding to immediate needs rather than working toward long-term goals. There are people trying to change that. Leaders in the free colonies who want to coordinate raids not just for resources, but to systematically weaken ARC infrastructure. Reclaimer commanders who argue we should be targeting the machine's core facilities even if it costs more lives. And engineers who believe the key is understanding ART technology well enough to build our own versions that don't depend on salvage. What's clear is that humanity's future depends on the raiders, on their willingness to keep going into danger, to keep bringing back what the settlements need, and to keep proving that we're not beaten yet. The ARC took our world, dismantled our civilization, and turned Earth into something alien, but they didn't take everything. They didn't take our ability to adapt, to learn, to fight back against impossible odds. And as long as there are people willing to raid their installations and steal their technology, humanity has a chance. The truth we don't talk about, but there's a darker truth that the raiding community doesn't like to acknowledge. That maybe we're not fighting for survival at all, maybe we're just prolonging the inevitable. The ARC are winning, slowly but steadily. They control more territory every year. Their machines become more sophisticated, and their resource extraction continues regardless of what we do. The settlements we protect are growing smaller as people die or disappear. The salvage we bring back is less effective because the machines have adapted to our tactics. And every year, there are fewer raiders because the attrition rate eventually catches up with everyone. Some veterans talk quietly about how raids that would have been considered successful 5 years ago barely break even now, how you need twice as many people to accomplish half as much, and how the valuable salvage is getting harder to find as the ARC have increased security around anything useful. There's also the question of what we're really preserving. The settlements aren't exactly thriving communities, they're barely functioning survival camps where people live day to day with no real future to look forward to. Children grow up knowing nothing except scarcity and danger, and the collective knowledge and culture of human civilization is slowly being lost because there's no time or resources for education or art or anything beyond immediate survival. Some raiders have started questioning whether they're helping or just making things worse, whether bringing back Archi technology is actually giving settlements a fighting chance, or just creating dependence on an endless cycle of raids that gets more dangerous every time. And there are the uncomfortable conversations about what happens when settlements can't support their populations anymore, when resources run so low that communities have to make terrible choices about who gets food and medicine, when the math of survival stops working and people have to face the reality that not everyone can be saved. These aren't topics that come up in public. You don't talk about them around the communal fires or during mission briefings, but in private moments between raids when people are honest with each other, there's an acknowledgement that the situation is worse than anyone wants to admit, and that hope might be nothing more than a comforting lie we tell ourselves to keep going. The final stand. But here's the thing about humanity. We've never been good at accepting defeat, even when defeat is the only rational conclusion. The raiding community knows the odds. They know the ARC are stronger. They know settlements are struggling. They know that every metric suggests we're losing this fight, and they go out anyway. They load up their salvaged weapons, they plan their routes through occupied territory, and they walk into danger because the alternative is giving up, and nobody's ready to do that yet. There's something almost defiant about it, this refusal to acknowledge reality, this insistence that as long as we're still taking the fight to the machines, we haven't lost. Maybe that's foolish, maybe it's noble, maybe it's just human nature to keep struggling, even when the struggle seems pointless. But it's what defines the raiders and the communities they protect. Every successful mission is a middle finger to the occupation. Every piece of salvaged tech is proof that we can still take something back from the machines that took everything from us. And every raider who comes home alive is a reminder that we're still here, still fighting, still refusing to let Earth belong to anyone except humanity. The ARC might be transforming the planet. They might be building their mysterious installations. They might be executing some incomprehensible plan that will eventually make human survival impossible. But until that day comes, the raiders will keep going out, keep bringing back what their settlements need, and keep proving that humanity doesn't quit. That's the story of Ark Raiders. It's not a story about winning or losing. It's a story about endurance, about fighting impossible odds, because fighting is all we have left, about salvaging hope from the wreckage of our world, and about refusing to go quietly into whatever future the machines have planned for Earth. It's a story that's still being written with every raid, every battle, every small victory against the occupation. And it'll keep being written as long as there are people willing to walk into ARC territory and take back pieces of the world we lost. So yeah, Earth belongs to the robots now. They took it from us, they're remaking it according to their own design, but they haven't finished the job yet, and as long as the raiders keep fighting, they never will, because the one thing the ARC didn't account for when they invaded is that humanity has survived every catastrophe we've ever faced. Not because we're stronger or smarter, but because we're too stubborn to know when we're beaten, and that stubbornness might just be enough to outlast even the most efficient machines ever built. Continue no matter what. 17. The breaking point. There comes a moment in every raider's life when they realise the job has changed them in ways they can't undo, when they look in whatever broken mirror they can find and see someone they don't recognise anymore, someone harder and colder and more willing to make choices that would have horrified the person they used to be. It happens gradually, so slowly you don't notice until one day you're standing over a wounded squad mate and you're doing the math in your head about whether saving them is worth the risk to everyone else. And the fact that you're even calculating that equation means something fundamental has shifted inside you. The settlements don't talk about this, they can't afford to, because they need raiders to keep going out. And if people understood the psychological cost too clearly, the recruitment would dry up completely. So instead they celebrate the victories and honour the fallen and pretend that everyone who comes back is fine, just tired, just needing some rest before the next mission. But the raiders know better. They see it in each other. The way veterans move through settlements like ghosts, present but not really there. The way they volunteer for increasingly dangerous missions, because somewhere along the way, the fear got replaced by numbness, and taking risks feels like the only way to feel anything at all. There are raiders who've been doing this for 5 years, 6 years longer, and you can see the weight of it in how they carry themselves. The accumulated trauma of watching friends die, of making impossible choices, of surviving when others didn't, and wondering why you're still here when better people aren't. Some of them self-medicate with whatever substances they can trade for. Others throw themselves into work and never stop moving because if they slow down, the thoughts catch up with them. And some just shut down emotionally and become pure function, tools for the community to use until they break. The younger raiders don't understand this yet. They're still running on adrenaline and the thrill of defying the occupation. They think they're invincible, or at least that death would be quick and meaningful, but give them a year or two, and they'll start to understand that the real danger isn't dying in a raid. It's living through enough raids that you forget how to be human anymore. The children of the fall. There's a whole generation now that doesn't remember the world before. Kids who were born after the ARC arrived or who were too young when it happened to retain any memories of normal civilization. They've grown up in settlements, learning to identify machine types before they learned to read, understanding raid tactics before they understood history, living with the constant background hum of ARC activity as just a normal part of existence. These kids are different from the adults in fundamental ways. They don't carry the grief of losing the old world because they never had it. They don't feel the same rage at the occupation because to them this is just how things are. And they approach the machines with a kind of practical acceptance that older survivors find both impressive and deeply sad. Some of these children are already training to become raiders, learning skills from veterans, practicing with salvaged weapons, studying maps of occupied territory, preparing for the day they'll be old enough to go out themselves. They're good at it too, unencumbered by memories of safety and normalcy, able to adapt to the brutal efficiency required for survival in ways adults struggle with. But there's something missing in them, some spark of what it means to be human that got lost when childhood became about learning to fight robots instead of playing and imagining and discovering the world. The adults try to preserve some normalcy for them, telling stories about the old world, teaching them things beyond survival skills, trying to give them a sense of what humanity was like before the fall. But it's hard to make that feel real when everything around them contradicts it. How do you explain cities to a child who's never seen a building taller than 3 stories? How do you describe the internet to someone who's grown up with communication limited to whatever distance a radio can reach? How do you convey the idea of peace and security when their entire existence has been defined by danger and scarcity? These children represent humanity's future, assuming we have one, and the question nobody wants to ask is what kind of people they'll become. Whether they'll grow up to keep fighting like their parents, or whether they'll eventually make peace with the occupation because they don't know any alternative, whether they'll preserve human culture and values, or develop something entirely new adapted to this harsh reality. Some of the older raiders worry that they're creating a generation of child soldiers, that by training these kids to fight, they're stealing whatever innocence they might have had left. But the counter-argument is that not training them would be worse because the machines aren't going to suddenly become less dangerous, and everyone needs to contribute to survival however they can. The anomalies, deep in the red zones in areas where ARC presence is heaviest and human raiders rarely venture, strange things have been reported by the few who've made it back. There are zones where time seems to move differently, where raiders enter thinking they'll be inside for hours and emerge to find days have passed, or vice versa, where they experience what feels like an extended operation but return to find only minutes have elapsed. There are areas where the laws of physics seem negotiable, where gravity fluctuates, where electronic equipment behaves in impossible ways, where the very air shimmers with energy that makes your skin tingle and your teeth ache. Some raiders report seeing things that can't be there, visions of people they know are dead, glimpses of places that don't exist on Earth, structures that seem to shift and change when you're not looking directly at them. And the deeper into ARC territory you go, the more common these anomalies become. The scientific-minded survivors try to explain it as some side effect of the machine's terraforming technology. Maybe their atmospheric processes or energy systems create localized distortions in space-time. Maybe exposure to certain frequencies causes hallucinations, but the explanations never quite fit what people actually experience out there. There are documented cases of raiders who went into deep red zones and came back changed, not just psychologically, but physically, showing signs of exposure to radiation that should have killed them, but instead seems to have altered them in subtle ways, or demonstrating abilities that shouldn't be possible, like knowing when machines are nearby before any sensors detect them, or surviving injuries that should have been fatal. The settlements don't know what to do with these cases. Some treat the affected raiders as valuable assets whose new abilities could be useful. Others quarantine them out of fear that whatever changed them might be contagious, or that they've been compromised by the machines. And some of the affected individuals just disappear back into occupied territory, drawn by something they can't explain, to the deep anomaly zones. There's a theory, unpopular but persistent, that the anomalies aren't side effects at all, but rather the actual purpose of the ARC occupation. That the machines aren't here to harvest resources or terraform the planet, but to transform it into something else entirely. Something that operates on rules we don't understand. And that what we're witnessing is Earth being converted from a normal physical place into something more exotic. A nexus point, or gateway, or experimental zone for forces beyond our comprehension. It sounds like science fiction, like conspiracy theory nonsense. But when you're living in a world where giant robots appeared from nowhere and took over the planet, when you've seen the anomalies yourself or talked to people who have, the line between rational skepticism and dangerous denial gets very blurry. The lost settlements. Not every human community survived the years since the fall. There are settlements that the raiders knew about, places they traded with or heard stories from, that have simply vanished. Sometimes you can find out what happened. You arrive at where the settlement should be and find nothing but scorch marks and destroyed buildings, clear evidence of an ark assault that left no survivors. Other times there's no trace at all. The settlement is just gone, and the area looks like nothing was ever there. The worst are the ones where you find the settlement intact but empty. Buildings still standing, supplies still in storage, personal belongings still in homes, but every single person gone without any sign of struggle or evacuation. These ghost settlements are deeply unsettling. They suggest that whatever took the people wasn't the standard ARC combat units, because those would have left destruction. Something else happened, something quiet and thorough that removed every human without disturbing anything else. Raiders debate what could cause this. The optimistic ones suggest the settlements evacuated in an orderly fashion, though that doesn't explain why they'd leave supplies behind. The pessimistic ones talk about new machine types that can capture rather than kill, though nobody's ever seen evidence of such units. And the paranoid ones whisper about settlements that try to negotiate with the machines, and learn too late that the ARC don't take prisoners, they just delete problems. There's also the question of settlements that cut off contact deliberately, communities that decided the best survival strategy was complete isolation, that stopped communicating with other human groups, that forbid raiders from approaching, and that might still be out there somewhere living according to their own rules. The free colonies track these lost settlements, maintaining maps and records of communities that have disappeared, partly for historical purposes, and partly because understanding how and why settlements fail might help prevent it from happening to the ones that remain, but it's grim work documenting the slow extinction of human civilization, one vanished community at a time. Some raiders make it their mission to investigate lost settlements, to find out what happened and whether there's anything to salvage, both in terms of supplies and in terms of knowledge about what threats to avoid. But these missions are among the most dangerous because you're going into areas where something went wrong enough to wipe out an entire community and hoping you're better prepared than they were. The black market. In any economy based on scarcity and survival, illegal trade inevitably emerges, and the settlements are no exception. There's a black market for salvage technology, raiders who hide the best items instead of turning them into the communal stores, traders who move goods between settlements at prices the communities can't afford, and dealers who traffic in everything from weapons to medicine to information. The free colonies officially oppose black market activity, arguing that hoarding resources or profiting from scarcity undermines the collective survival effort. But enforcement is difficult when the people with access to the best salvage are the same raiders the settlements depend on. Some of the black market trade is relatively benign, raiders keeping a few extra items as insurance or trading favours with each other. But there's also a darker side, people selling weapons to the reclaimers that could be used in operations that endanger everyone, traders diluting medicine to increase profits, even though it makes the treatments less effective, and information brokers selling intelligence about settlement defences or raid schedules to whoever pays, which raises uncomfortable questions about who they're selling to. The most valuable and controversial black market commodity is ARC technology that hasn't been approved for general use. Experimental devices that could be incredibly powerful but are also unstable or dangerous. Data drives containing information the leadership has deemed too risky to share publicly, and components that could theoretically be used to build weapons far more destructive than anything currently in the settlement's arsenals. There are rumours of entire raiding parties that operate completely outside the Free Colonies structure, mercenary groups that will steal specific items for clients who can pay, that don't share intelligence with the broader community, and that answer to no authority except profit. The settlements are torn on how to handle this. Cracking down too hard would alienate the raiders whose skills are essential, but ignoring it means resources that could help everyone instead benefit a few. And there's always the risk that black market activity will draw ARC attention or destabilise the fragile cooperation that keeps humanity alive. Some settlement leaders have tried working with the black market rather than against it, using it as a way to incentivise raiders and ensure valuable items end up where they're needed most. But this approach has its own problems. It creates inequality and resentment. It rewards people for prioritising personal gain over collective survival, and it establishes precedents that could undermine community cohesion in the long term. The betrayal's trust is everything in the raiding community. You're trusting your squad mates with your life every time you go into occupied territory, trusting settlement leaders to support you with resources and intelligence, trusting other settlements to honour agreements and share information. But sometimes that trust gets broken in ways that have serious consequences. There have been cases of raiders betraying their squads, leading them into ambushes for personal gain or to settle grudges, taking valuable salvage and disappearing rather than returning to the settlement, or selling out raid plans to rival factions. There have been settlements that violated agreements with others, hoarding resources they promised to share, refusing to provide aid when it was desperately needed, or even raiding other human communities for supplies when machine territory was too dangerous. And there have been individuals who've done far worse, people who've collaborated with the ARC occupation in whatever capacity that means, whether by leading machines to settlement locations, sabotaging defences to enable attacks, or providing intelligence about human activities to forces that definitely shouldn't have it. The punishment for betrayal varies depending on the severity and the settlement's laws. Minor violations might result in exile or loss of privileges. Serious betrayals often mean execution because the community can't afford to keep someone around who's proven untrustworthy. But the worst cases are the ones where the traitor escapes before justice can be served and becomes a permanent threat lurking out there somewhere. The psychological impact of betrayal ripples through the community. Every incident makes people a little more suspicious, a little less willing to trust new arrivals or share sensitive information, a little more likely to suspect others of having hidden agendas. And over time, this erosion of trust makes cooperation harder, even though cooperation is essential for survival. Some betrayals are motivated by desperation, people who felt they had no choice but to break agreements or harm others to protect themselves or their families. And these cases create moral dilemmas because punishing someone for doing what seemed necessary for survival feels wrong, but not punishing them sets a dangerous precedent. Other betrayals are purely selfish, people who saw an opportunity to gain at others' expense and took it without regard for the consequences. And these are easier to condemn, but no less damaging to community cohesion. And then there are the betrayals that nobody wants to acknowledge, the compromises settlement leaders make that sacrifice some people to save others, the decisions to abandon certain communities or refuse aid to preserve resources, the calculations that weigh lives against strategic objectives. These aren't betrayals in the legal sense, but they feel like betrayals to the people affected, and they create resentments that can fester for years. The religion of resistance. In the absence of traditional religious institutions and with the old world's certainties shattered, new belief systems have emerged among survivors, some of them quite strange. The most widespread is what raiders call the religion of resistance, not really an organised religion, but a shared set of values, an almost spiritual commitment to fighting the occupation. Adherents believe that humanity's struggle against the ARC has meaning beyond simple survival, that every act of resistance affirms human dignity and free will, that dying while fighting is more honourable than living in submission, and that future generations will judge them based on how fiercely they oppose the machines. This belief system doesn't require faith in a deity, but it has ritual elements. Raiders perform ceremonies before missions to honour fallen comrades. Settlements observe moments of silence for lost communities, and there are sayings and mantras that people repeat to steel themselves for danger. Some survivors have taken it further, developing genuinely religious interpretations of the occupation. The pilgrims believe the ARC are a divine test of humanity's worthiness, that we must prove ourselves through suffering and resistance to earn the right to reclaim Earth. The synthesists view the machines as the next step in evolution and believe humanity must merge with them to transcend our limitations. They see raiders who die fighting the ARC as martyrs who sacrifice themselves for a greater understanding. And there are darker cults, groups that worship the machines as gods, that believe the ARC are here to cleanse Earth of humanity's corruption, that offer themselves to the occupation in hopes of mercy or transformation. These cults are small and secretive because openly advocating submission to the machines would get you exiled or worse, but they exist and occasionally cause problems by sabotaging defences or trying to prevent raids. The mainstream raiding community views most of these belief systems with skepticism. They're too focused on practical survival to worry much about cosmic meaning, but many of them acknowledge that having something to believe in, beyond just staying alive another day, helps people cope with the constant stress and loss. Some of the most effective raiders are true believers in the religion of resistance, people who've turned fighting the occupation into their life's purpose, who approach each mission with an almost religious fervour, and who inspire others through their absolute commitment, even if that same commitment sometimes leads them to take unnecessary risks. The partnerships. Not everyone in the settlements is a raider. There are all the support roles that make raiding possible, and the relationships between raiders and support personnel are complicated. There are the engineers who maintain equipment and reverse engineer salvage technology. They're often as valuable as the raiders themselves, because without functional gear, the missions can't happen, but they also don't face the same risks, which creates tension when resources are allocated. There are the scouts and intelligence analysts who study ARC patterns and identify targets. Their work happens mostly from safe zones using surveillance equipment and intercepted machine communications. Essential work but removed from the immediate danger of insertion. There are the medical personnel who patch raiders up after missions, dealing with injuries ranging from minor to horrific, watching people they've saved die on the next run out, developing their own trauma from constant exposure to the cost of raiding. And there are the logistics coordinators who plan missions, allocate resources, decide which raids get greenlit and which don't, making life and death decisions from behind desks, while the raiders are the ones who live or die based on those decisions. The relationships between these groups can be positive, mutual respect, an understanding that everyone's contribution matters, or they can be fraught with resentment, raiders feeling like the support staff don't appreciate the risks being taken, support staff feeling like raiders get all the glory and resources, while equally important work goes unrecognised. Romantic relationships between raiders and non-raiders are particularly complicated. The non-raider partner has to live with constant uncertainty about whether their loved one will come back from each mission, and the raider has to balance their commitment to their partner against their commitment to the community and the mission. Some settlements have informal rules about raiders not forming attachments because it's seen as a liability, emotions compromising judgment in critical situations. But people being people, those rules get broken regularly, and then everyone has to deal with the consequences when tragedy inevitably strikes. There are also partnerships between raiders and settlement children, mentorship relationships where veterans train the next generation, passing on skills and knowledge, but also trauma and a worldview shaped by constant violence, creating bonds that are part teacher-student and part parent-child, and always complicated by the awareness that the mentor is training the student for a life that will probably end badly. The technology race. Humanity's survival depends on closing the technological gap with the ARC, which means the work happening in settlement workshops and engineering labs is as important as anything the raiders do in the field. The problem is that ARC technology operates on principles human science barely understands. Their power systems seem to violate thermodynamic laws. Their materials have properties that shouldn't be possible with any known elements, and their computing systems work in ways that suggest either quantum processing far beyond what humans achieved or something else entirely. Engineers working with salvaged technology often feel like they're trying to understand calculus when they barely grasp arithmetic, taking things apart and putting them back together through trial and error, achieving results without really understanding why those results happen. Progress is slow and often involves setbacks, devices that work perfectly for months, suddenly failing catastrophically, modifications that seem promising, causing unforeseen problems, and breakthrough discoveries that turn out to not scale beyond specific circumstances. But there have been genuine advances. Humans have figured out how to manufacture some components locally rather than depending entirely on salvage, how to interface human equipment with ARC power systems, at least temporarily, and how to create weapons specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in machine armor. The arms race aspect is real too. Every time humans develop a new tactic or weapon, the machines eventually adapt, which forces the engineers to find new approaches in a cycle that has no end point, as long as both sides keep innovating. Some settlements focus their limited resources on defensive technology, better ways to detect approaching machines, stronger fortifications, early warning systems, while others prioritize offensive capabilities, weapons that can take down higher-tier machines, devices that can disrupt ARC communications, or sensors, tools that make raids more effective. There's constant debate about the right balance, whether it's better to make settlements harder to attack or to make raids more successful, whether resources should go toward understanding the machines better or toward developing human technology that doesn't depend on salvage, whether the goal should be parity with the ARC or finding asymmetric advantages that let us compete despite being technologically inferior. And there's the uncomfortable reality that a lot of progress comes from captured or killed raiders. Every time someone dies in ARC territory wearing experimental equipment, the engineers learn something from the failure. Every time a mission goes wrong, because a device malfunctioned, there's data to analyze, meaning human lives are being traded for incremental technological advancement in an equation nobody wants to calculate too precisely. The unspeakable horrors. There are things that happen in the deep red zones that raiders don't talk about. Experiences so disturbing, they get buried rather than shared, even among squad mates who've seen terrible things together. Some raiders have found what look like processing facilities where the machines are doing something to organic matter, not harvesting resources but conducting experiments, breaking down biological material and reconstructing it in patterns that suggest they're trying to understand life or create something new. Others have encountered areas where the environment has been altered so drastically it barely resembles Earth anymore. Landscapes that look like they belong on alien worlds, ecosystems that have been transformed into machine analogues, with metal trees and synthetic creatures that move like animals but are clearly artificial. There are reports, never officially confirmed, of human remains integrated into ARC structures, bodies fused with machines in ways that suggest the people were alive when it happened, turned into components or test subjects or something worse that nobody wants to name. Raiders who've seen these things often don't survive long afterward, either because the trauma breaks them or because they take increasing risks in subsequent missions, like they're trying to die without admitting it. The settlements have unwritten agreements not to share the worst details, not to describe certain sights or sounds or discoveries in any specificity, because knowing that stuff doesn't help anyone survive, and it just spreads the psychological damage. But the knowledge accumulates anyway. Whispered warnings about sectors to avoid, raiders who suddenly refuse to go anywhere near certain ARC facilities, veterans who wake up screaming and won't explain why, all testament to encounters with things that challenge not just human survival, but human sanity. Some survivors theorize that the worst horrors are intentional psychological warfare, that the ARC have figured out what disturbs humans most deeply and create those situations deliberately to discourage further resistance. But most raiders think that gives the machines too much credit for understanding human psychology when they barely acknowledge our existence. The scarier interpretation is that the horrors aren't aimed at us at all. They're just byproducts of whatever the machines are really doing, side effects of processes we can't comprehend, which would mean the truly disturbing stuff is still hidden in facilities too secure for any raider to penetrate. There are items that come back from raids that nobody knows what to do with, salvaged data drives, containing information so disturbing the analysts who review it need psychological support afterward, pieces of technology that function in ways that seem designed to harm human physiology specifically, artifacts that don't match any known RC systems and might not be from the machines at all, but from something else entirely. The policy is to destroy or secure these items, keep them away from general population, but raiders know they exist and wonder what else is out there waiting to be found. The choice. Every person in the settlements eventually faces a choice about what role they'll play in humanity's struggle, whether they'll become raiders, support personnel, or try to live as normally as possible in very abnormal circumstances. For some, the choice is obvious. They have skills that translate naturally to raiding or support roles. They feel called to fight, or they simply don't see any other option. For others, it's agonizing, weighing the duty to contribute against the desire to survive, wanting to help but being terrified of what help requires, trying to figure out where they can make the most difference with their particular abilities. There's no judgment supposed to come with the choice. Everyone contributes how they can, and all roles matter, but in practice, there absolutely is judgment. Raiders viewed as heroes, while people who choose not to raid are sometimes seen as cowards. Support staff resenting that their equally necessary work gets less recognition, and people just trying to live their lives, feeling guilty for not doing more. Young adults face the choice with particular intensity. They're at the age where they could become raiders. Their bodies are strong and their reflexes quick, but they're also the generation that could potentially rebuild humanity if we survive long enough. So is it more valuable for them to risk their lives fighting or preserve themselves for a possible future? Some settlements have mandatory service requirements. Everyone contributes a certain amount to raiding or support roles before they're allowed to focus on other pursuits, trying to balance the need for active resistance with the need for normal social functions. Others leave it entirely voluntary, believing that forcing people into danger creates resentment and doesn't build the kind of community that can endure long term. The choice also changes over time. Raiders age out of active duty as their bodies can't handle the physical demands anymore. Support personnel sometimes decide they need to understand the front lines firsthand, and people who try to stay uninvolved defined circumstances push them toward more active roles. There are also those who refuse the binary, who create their own paths that don't fit the established categories. Wanderers who move between settlements, trading goods and information. Researchers who go into occupied territory, not to raid but to study. Diplomats who try to establish connections with other survivor groups. And dozens of other roles people have invented to contribute in ways that feel right to them. The underlying truth is that everyone's trying to find meaning and purpose in a world that no longer makes sense, trying to balance survival against living in a way they can be proud of. And the choice of how to contribute is really a choice about what kind of person you want to be when everything you knew has been destroyed. The endurance. So this is where we are, years into an occupation with no end in sight, fighting a war we can't win against an enemy we don't understand, for a world that might already be lost. The raiders keep going out because that's what raiders do. The settlements keep surviving because humanity is stubborn, and every day that we don't go extinct is a kind of victory, even if it doesn't feel like one. The ARC continue their work, transforming Earth into whatever they're building, processing resources and constructing installations, and executing their incomprehensible agenda, barely acknowledging human resistance as anything more than a minor obstacle to be worked around. But we're still here, still taking their technology, still making them work for every inch of territory, still refusing to accept that this planet belongs to anyone except the people who evolved here. And maybe that's enough. Maybe simple endurance is its own form of resistance. Maybe surviving long enough to see what happens next is the only victory available to us. The raiders understand this in ways other people don't. They've stared into the mechanical face of the occupation up close. They've taken fire from defender units and survived. They've walked through installations that make it clear how outmatched we are, and they still choose to go back out because the alternative is surrender. And surrender isn't in the human vocabulary. Not really. Not when we still have options, no matter how limited those options might be. This is the complete story of Ark Raiders so far. Incomplete because the story's still being written, uncertain because nobody knows how it ends, but real in every detail, because this is what resistance looks like when you're fighting for your species' survival against impossible odds. It's not glorious or cinematic. It's just people doing what needs to be done, day after day, mission after mission, loss after loss, victory after victory, enduring, because enduring is all we have left, and sometimes that's enough. Continue, no. Matter what, 1726, the silence between raids. The hardest part isn't the missions themselves, it's the time between them, the hours and days when you're back in the settlement, and there's nothing to distract you from everything you've seen and done. Raiders cope with this in different ways. Some throw themselves into preparations for the next run, obsessively checking equipment and reviewing maps and planning routes until exhaustion forces them to sleep. Others drink or use whatever substances they can trade for, chasing numbness because feeling nothing is better than feeling everything all at once. The fear and guilt and rage that builds up when you have time to process it. Some seek out companionship, needing human connection to remind themselves they're still human, leading to intense brief relationships that burn hot and fast because nobody knows how much time they have. And some just sit in the silence, staring at nothing, trapped inside their own heads with memories they can't share and thoughts they can't escape, waiting for the next mission, brief that will give them purpose again. The settlement leadership tries to provide structure, assigns tasks and responsibilities, organises communal activities meant to build morale. But there's only so much you can do to fill the void that opens up when someone's gone from constant life-threatening action to forced inactivity. New raiders don't understand this yet. They come back from their first few successful missions, feeling invincible and alive, riding the high of survival and accomplishment, thinking they've figured out how to handle the stress. Give them 6 months, give them a dozen missions, give them enough time to lose people they care about, and make choices that haunt them, And they'll understand why the veterans are different, why they carry themselves like people who've already died but haven't stopped moving yet. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that sets in after years of raiding. Not physical tiredness, though, there's plenty of that, but a deep weariness of the soul that comes from constantly operating at the edge of human endurance with no end in sight. Some raiders call it the fade, the feeling that you're becoming less real somehow, like you're watching your own life from outside your body, going through the motions because that's what you do, but not really present anymore. The fade is dangerous because it makes you careless, takes away the fear that keeps you sharp, and raiders in the fade either snap out of it or die. There's no middle ground. Settlements watch for signs of it, try to pull people back with mandatory rest periods or reassignments to support roles, but you can't force someone to care about their own survival if they've reached the point where they don't anymore. The quiet ones. Not everyone who fights the ARC does it loudly. There are survivors who resist in smaller, quieter ways that don't involve raids but are no less important. There are people who maintain gardens in the safe zones, coaxing food from soil. The machines haven't contaminated, preserving seeds and agricultural knowledge for a future when Earth might support farming again. There are teachers who work with the children, trying to pass on history and culture and ideas beyond just survival skills, fighting to preserve what it means to be human when everything pushes toward pure utility. There are artists who create, despite the scarcity of materials, drawing and sculpting and making music with whatever they can find, insisting that beauty and creativity matter even when practical concerns seem so much more urgent. There are archivists who record stories and maintain what records survived the fall, documenting raids and settlements, and everything that happens so that future generations will know what their ancestors endured. And there are the counsellors and healers, people who help others process trauma and maintain mental health, who talk people down from breaking points and help raiders integrate back into community life between missions. These quiet resistors don't get the recognition raiders do. Their work doesn't produce salvage or kill machines, but they're fighting to preserve the reasons we're surviving in the first place, maintaining humanity's spirit and culture and sense of self beyond just biological existence. Some of them are former raiders who aged out or got injured, channeling their experience into support roles, using their understanding of what people go through to help others cope. Others never raided at all but found different ways to contribute, paths that let them fight the occupation without picking up weapons. The relationship between these groups and the active raiders is complicated. There's mutual respect in theory, but also tension, arguments about resource allocation, debates about whether preserving culture matters when immediate survival is uncertain, resentments that build when people feel their contributions aren't valued equally. But the best settlements manage to honour all forms of resistance, recognising that fighting the ARC isn't just about killing machines and stealing technology, it's about maintaining everything that makes us worth saving. All the complicated, messy human stuff that has no tactical value but infinite intrinsic worth. The forbidden knowledge. There are things humanity has learned about the ARC that the leadership keeps classified, information too dangerous or destabilising to share publicly. Some of this is tactical, details about machine weaknesses that would lose effectiveness if widely known, intelligence about ARC operations that only matters for specific raids, codes and frequencies that work for hacking machine systems, but would be changed immediately if the machines knew we had them. But there's other information that's kept secret for different reasons, discoveries so disturbing they could break morale, theories so dark they might cause panic, possibilities so terrifying that most people are better off not knowing. There are analysts who've studied ARC behaviour patterns and believe they've identified what the machines are building toward, what the endpoint of their terraforming might be, but that information is locked away, where only a few people have access. There are engineers who've found things in salvaged data drives that suggest the ARC know far more about humanity than we thought, that they've been observing us in ways we didn't realize, that maybe the occupation has been going on longer than anyone suspects. There are raiders who've penetrated deep facilities and seen installations that don't match the standard ARC architecture, structures that might be much older than the occupation itself, evidence that maybe these machines have been on Earth before, or that what we think of as the fall was actually just the moment we noticed something that had been happening for much longer. The leadership justifies classification by saying people can't handle certain truths. That knowledge without context causes more harm than ignorance. That strategic information needs to be protected. But there's also the control aspect. Knowledge is power, especially in communities built on scarcity. And the people who decide what information gets shared also decide what narrative shapes public understanding of the situation. Some raiders resent this, feel they have a right to know everything discovered in missions they risk their lives on, argue that keeping secrets undermines the collective survival effort. Others accept it, trust that leadership is making necessary decisions, believe that some knowledge, genuinely, is too dangerous for general distribution. And then there are those who actively seek forbidden knowledge, who break into secure data stores or pressure analysts to share classified information, who believe transparency matters more than stability, even if the truth is hard. These knowledge seekers sometimes discover things that change them, information that makes them question everything about the occupation and humanity's response, secrets that suggest the situation is far more complex than the public narrative acknowledges, and they're left with the burden of knowing things they can't share and aren't sure how to act on. The other survivors. Humanity's settlements aren't the only survivors adapting to ARC occupation. Earth's ecosystem has changed in profound ways, but life persists in forms both familiar and strange. In areas where machine activity is light, there are still wild animals, populations diminished and behaviour altered, but recognisably the species that existed before the fall, deer that have learned to avoid certain sounds associated with ARC patrols, birds that nest in ways that make them harder for drones to detect, predators that have found machines easier to avoid than humans ever were. But in the occupied zones, new forms of life have emerged, organisms that thrive in the altered environment the ARC create, things that aren't quite animals and aren't quite machines, but something in between. There are creatures that incorporate metal into their bodies, using salvaged components to build nests, or even integrating ARC materials into their physical structure in ways that suggest biological adaptation to technological presence. There are plants that grow in soil the machines have processed, species that shouldn't survive in the mineral composition the ARC leave behind but somehow do, evolving at rates that seem impossibly fast, or maybe just revealing adaptability that was always there, waiting for the right conditions. Raiders report encountering things in deep red zones that they can't categorize, organisms that might be biological, might be synthetic, might be something else entirely, behaving according to patterns that suggest intelligence, but of a type very different from human or machine. Some survivors theorize that the ARC terraforming is creating conditions for these hybrid life forms intentionally, that the occupation isn't about preparing Earth for some alien species, but about seeding it with new forms of life that can exist in the transformed environment. Others think these organisms are unintended consequences, biological systems adapting to ARC presence in ways the machines didn't anticipate, evolution responding to selection pressures in real time. Either way, they represent a future for Earth that doesn't include humanity, at least not humanity as we currently exist, a planet populated by life forms adapted to conditions we can't survive in, ecosystems built around machine infrastructure instead of natural processes. It's another way we're losing the world, not just to the occupation itself, but to the changes it enables, watching Earth become something alien, one adapted organism at a time. The memory wars. As years pass and more people die, disagreements emerge about how to remember the past, what stories to tell the children, which version of history should be preserved. Some survivors want to remember the old world accurately, teach the next generation about how things used to be, with all the complexity and problems that entailed, prepare them to rebuild something similar if humanity ever reclaims the planet. Others argue for a romanticized version that emphasizes the good and minimizes the bad, giving children hope and pride in what was lost, rather than burdening them with uncomfortable truths about a world they never knew. And some believe the past should be largely forgotten, that dwelling on what's gone is counterproductive, that children should be raised to thrive in the current reality rather than mourning something they can't have back. These disagreements get heated because they're really about identity and purpose, about what humanity should aspire to be assuming we survive. The arguments extend to how we remember the fall itself. Some want to emphasize the resistance and heroism, the stories of people who fought back and helped others, creating a narrative of human courage and resilience. Others insist on remembering the failures too, the chaos and panic, the governments that collapsed and systems that broke down, the ways people turned on each other when things got bad. And there's fierce debate about whether to teach children that reclaiming Earth is possible, or whether that's a false hope that will only lead to disappointment, whether to raise them as warriors preparing for liberation, or survivors adapting to permanent occupation. Different settlements land in different places on these questions, some teaching traditional history as best they can recreate it, others creating new mythologies adapted to current needs, and most doing some mixture that satisfies neither the preservationists nor the pragmatists. Raiders play a complicated role in these memory wars because they're the ones still engaging with the occupation most directly. Their experiences and stories shape how people understand the current situation, but their perspective is also distorted by constant exposure to danger and violence. What a veteran raider considers important historical knowledge might be tactical information irrelevant to a child's education. What they dismiss as irrelevant might be crucial cultural context for someone trying to preserve human identity. There have been cases where settlements split over these disagreements, groups leaving to establish new communities where they can teach their children according to different values, creating even more fragmentation in an already scattered human population. And there's the uncomfortable awareness that human culture is being lost regardless of these efforts. There's no way to preserve everything, no resources to maintain comprehensive archives, and each generation will know less about the past than the one before, until eventually the world before the fall exists only in fragmentary stories that might not even be accurate anymore. The mutations, exposure to ARC technology, and the altered environments the machines create has effects on human biology, some of them becoming apparent only years after the occupation began. There are people who've spent extensive time in occupied zones showing cellular changes, alterations to their DNA that scientists with limited equipment can barely analyze, but that clearly represents something significant. Some raiders develop enhanced abilities, reflexes faster than they should be, perception sharper than normal, capacity to function on less sleep or survive injuries that should be fatal. The settlements don't know what to make of these changes. They're useful in the short term because enhanced raiders are more effective, but they're also worrying because nobody understands what's causing them or what the long-term consequences might be. There are theories maybe it's radiation from ARC power sources affecting human cells in ways that trigger rapid evolution. Maybe it's nanotech in the air of occupied zones that integrates with human biology. Maybe it's something in the altered soil or water that we're absorbing through environmental exposure. Whatever the cause, the mutations are real and spreading. Children born to parents who've been heavily exposed to ARC territory sometimes show unusual traits from birth, developing faster than normal. demonstrating abilities that seem impossible, responding to stimuli in ways that suggest altered neurology. Some communities celebrate these mutations as humanity's adaptation to the new world, proof that we are evolving to compete with the machines, developing capabilities that will help us survive and eventually reclaim the planet. Others view them with fear or disgust, seeing them as evidence that the occupation is corrupting us at a biological level, that we're losing our humanity through involuntary transformation, that what's emerging isn't an improved version of us, but something different that will eventually replace baseline humans. There have been proposals to quarantine mutated individuals, prevent them from reproducing to preserve unaltered human genetics, but these are controversial and difficult to enforce, especially when some of the most effective raiders are among the mutated. There's also the question of choice. Some people exposed to mutagenic effects embrace the changes and seek further exposure, essentially volunteering to become something other than baseline human in hopes of gaining advantages, while others desperately try to avoid occupied zones and limit their transformation. The ethical debates around this are intense. Does someone have the right to mutate themselves, even if it might impact the human gene pool long term? Should communities force exposure on people who could benefit from mutation but don't want it? Should resources go towards studying and controlling these changes, or toward accepting and managing them? And underlying all of it is uncertainty about where this leads, whether mutations will stabilize at some point or keep progressing, whether enhanced humans will remain compatible with baseline humans for reproduction, whether we're witnessing the speciation of humanity in real time, with one branch adapted to the old Earth and another to the new. The bargains. There are rumours, never confirmed but persistent enough that many people believe them, of individuals or groups that have made deals with the ARC, trading something the machines want for survival or advantage. The most common story involves settlements that were spared from attack in exchange for not interfering with nearby ARC operations, essentially accepting vassalage to the occupation. The Free Colonies officially denies these rumours, insists that no human community has collaborated, but raiders swear they've encountered settlements that show signs of machine protection, areas where ARC presence is heavy, but where human habitation is left unmolested in ways that can't be coincidence. Then there are stories about individuals who've somehow gained the ability to move through occupied territory unmolested, who can walk past defenders without being targeted, who enter red zones and emerge unharmed with salvage that should have been impossible to acquire. Some claim these people have implanted ARC technology that marks them as non-threatening to machine sensors. Others suggest they found ways to hack into the ARC network and spoof their identity codes, and the darkest theories propose they've actually communicated with whatever intelligence controls the machines and negotiated safe passage in exchange for services rendered. The nature of these alleged services varies depending on who's telling the story. Some say the collaborators provide intelligence about human settlements and raid plans. Others claim they deliver captured humans for whatever the machines do with biological subjects. And the most disturbing versions suggest they're helping the ARC understand human psychology and behaviour to make the occupation more effective. Whether any of this is true is impossible to verify. The accused collaborators either don't exist or deny everything, and the evidence is always circumstantial. But the rumours persist because they touch on a deep fear that not everyone is committed to resistance, that some people might choose survival through submission over survival through struggle. The settlements have become paranoid about infiltration, watching for signs that someone's movements are too lucky, that they always seem to avoid machine patrols, that they return from raids with suspiciously good salvage and no injuries. Accusations of collaboration can destroy lives even without proof. People shunned by their communities, denied resources, sometimes killed by vigilantes who decide justice can't wait for evidence. This creates its own problems, because innocent people get caught up in suspicion, skilled raiders who've just been lucky or learned to read machine patterns exceptionally well find themselves accused of impossible crimes. And it makes actual collaboration easier to hide because everyone's so paranoid about false accusations that real evidence gets dismissed as more witch hunting. The children soldiers. The reality nobody wants to acknowledge is that settlements are using child soldiers, not officially, and not by that name, but the training programs for young people. And the age at which some of them start going on raids adds up to children fighting in a war. The justifications are practical. Humanity needs every capable person contributing to survival. Waiting until someone is 18 to let them raid means wasting years, when their bodies are at peak capability. And besides, the children want to help. They see their parents and older siblings risking their lives, and they want to do their part. But that doesn't change what it is sending 15 and 16-year-olds into occupied territory, giving them weapons and expecting them to kill or be killed, exposing them to trauma that will define the rest of their lives, assuming they survive. Some settlements try to maintain boundaries, insisting on minimum ages and parental consent and graduated training programs. But desperation makes those boundaries flexible and eventually meaningless. There are raiding squads where half the members are under 18, where the most aggressive fighters are teenagers who've never known anything but the occupation and approach combat with a recklessness born of having nothing to lose. The psychological damage is obvious, even if nobody talks about it. Children with 1,000-yard stares, kids who've seen more death than any human should witness, adolescents making life and death decisions that adults would struggle with. Some of them become incredibly effective raiders, their youth giving them physical advantages, and their lack of pre-fall memories, meaning they adapt more easily to the brutal realities of constant warfare. But effectiveness doesn't make it right, and everyone knows it, even if admitting it would require changes the settlements can't afford. The children themselves have complicated feelings about it. Some embrace their role as warriors and find identity in being useful. Others resent being thrust into danger, while simultaneously feeling guilty about that resentment because everyone else is suffering too. And there's the question of what happens to these child soldiers if humanity does survive and reclaim something like civilization. How do you reintegrate people who spent their formative years killing machines and watching friends die, who never learned how to exist in anything like normal society because they grew up in permanent war? Some of the older survivors talk about how they'll help these children heal when the fighting's done, provide therapy and support, and help them build peaceful lives. But the child soldiers themselves often don't believe in a peaceful future. They expect to die raiding, and they've made their peace with that. And the idea of living through this and having to figure out what comes after feels more frightening than dying in combat. The art of ruin. In the settlements, and even in some of the safer occupied zones, art has emerged that reflects and processes the reality of living under machine occupation. Raiders and civilians alike create works that capture the aesthetic of ruin and resistance. Sculptures made from salvaged ARC components, paintings depicting the altered, landscapes where machine structures rise above devastated cities, music composed with instruments built from scrap metal and played in rhythms that echo the mechanical sounds of the occupation. This art serves multiple purposes. It's a way to process trauma and fear and grief. It's a form of resistance asserting that human creativity persists, even in the worst circumstances. And it's a method of communication that conveys experiences words struggle to express. Some of it is beautiful in ways that make people uncomfortable, finding aesthetic value in the destruction of the world they knew, transforming horror into something that can be contemplated and even appreciated. Other pieces are deliberately disturbing, forcing viewers to confront what the occupation has done, refusing to let anyone become comfortably numb to the situation. There are raiders who photograph their missions, capturing images of ARC installations and machine types and the landscapes between human and occupied territory, creating archives that serve both tactical purposes and artistic ones. There are musicians who've developed new musical forms influenced by machine sounds, incorporating the hum of ASCII processors and the mechanical rhythms of Defender unit movements into compositions that sound like nothing from the old world. And there are writers and storytellers, people who document raids and settlements, and survivors who craft narratives that give shape to the chaos and meaning to the suffering, even when that meaning is uncomfortable or unclear. The settlements have mixed feelings about this art. Some embrace it as culturally valuable and important for morale. Others see it as frivolous use of resources and time when survival should be the only priority. There have been arguments about whether materials should be used for art or reserved for practical purposes, whether people with artistic skills should be creating or should be raiding or doing support work, whether celebrating or even acknowledging the aesthetic aspects of the occupation somehow legitimizes it. But the art persists because humans need it, need to express and process and create even in the worst circumstances, need to assert that we're more than just survival machines ourselves. And some of the most powerful work comes from people grappling with their own complicity and transformation. Raiders who've done terrible things, processing that through creation. Survivors struggling with guilt and loss, trying to make sense of it. People watching themselves and their community change in fundamental ways and documenting that change before it's complete and they can't remember what they used to be. The last conversation. Every raider has had it or will have it. The last conversation before a mission that turns out to be someone's final one. The moment you realize in retrospect was goodbye even though neither of you knew it at the time. These conversations haunt survivors, replaying in memory with unbearable clarity. Every word analysed for meaning that wasn't there. Every moment treasured and regretted simultaneously. Sometimes they're mundane, talking about equipment or discussing plans. Nothing special, because you assumed there'd be more conversations later, and there's no reason to make it significant. Sometimes they're more personal, sharing fears or hopes, saying things you wouldn't normally say, because something makes you more honest than usual, even if you don't consciously realise why. And sometimes they're arguments or disagreements, the last interaction marked by anger or tension, and then the person doesn't come back, and you're left carrying that forever. The knowledge that your final words to someone you cared about were harsh, and now you can never take them back or apologise or explain. The community tries to provide rituals for processing loss, memorial services, and moments of silence, and traditions around honouring the dead, but nothing really helps with the specific agony of last conversations. The intimate personal grief of losing someone whose voice you can still hear in your memory, saying things that now carry weight they didn't have when they were spoken. Some raiders become superstitious about it, refusing to say certain things before missions, insisting on particular farewell rituals, trying to control the uncontrollable through behaviour that logically makes no difference but psychologically feels essential. Others go the opposite direction, treating every conversation like it might be the last, saying the important things explicitly and regularly, making sure people know they're cared about because you never know which interaction will be final. Both approaches have costs. Superstition provides false comfort that makes the inevitable losses more devastating, while treating everything as potentially final creates an exhausting intensity that makes normal interaction difficult. And there are those who try to avoid attachments entirely, keeping relationships surface level, not letting anyone get close enough that their loss would be devastating, building walls that protect against grief, but also isolate them from the connections that make survival meaningful. The truth is, there's no good way to handle this. No approach that makes it hurt less when someone you care about doesn't come back. And the accumulation of these losses over time creates a kind of emotional scarring where people become increasingly numb, not because they don't care, but because caring has hurt them too many times and numbness is the only way to keep functioning. The settlements need people to keep functioning, to keep raiding and supporting and surviving, regardless of how many times they experience loss. So there's pressure to get over it quickly, to process grief efficiently and return to contributing. But that's not how grief works, and the community is full of people carrying unresolved pain from countless last conversations that they never got to finish. The breaking dawn. Some mornings you wake up in the settlement, and for just a moment you forget. Your mind is still fuzzy from sleep and hasn't remembered yet that the world ended. And in that brief window before consciousness fully returns, you feel almost peaceful. Then reality crashes back in, the awareness of where you are and why, the knowledge of what happened to Earth and what you'll probably have to do today, and the peace evaporates like it was never there. Raiders describe this moment with a particular kind of resignation. It happens less frequently the longer you survive because your brain learns not to forget even in sleep. But when it does happen, the contrast between that brief peace and the return of awareness is almost physically painful. Some people start their days with routines meant to ease this transition, exercises or prayers or small rituals that create a buffer between sleep and full consciousness, giving themselves time to rebuild the mental armor they need to face another day. Others prefer to wake up fast and harsh, shocking themselves into awareness with cold water or immediate activity, rejecting the false comfort of that peaceful moment because they'd rather feel the pain all at once than have it sneak up on them. The settlement itself changes quality with the light. Pre-dawn hours, when most people are still sleeping, have a different feeling than the full activity of day. Everything quieter and slower, the sounds of the occupation more noticeable without human noise to cover them. Raiders on early missions move through this pre-dawn world, seeing things most people miss, the way light reflects off ARC structures. In the distance, the patterns of machine activity in the transition between night and day. The strange beauty of a ruined world that hasn't fully woken yet. There's something profound about these moments, standing at the edge of occupied territory, watching the sun rise over a landscape that's barely recognizable as Earth anymore. Knowing you're about to walk into danger, but having this brief window where you can just observe and exist. Some raiders come to treasure these times, the last remnant of contemplation in lives otherwise defined by action and reaction, moments where they can remember they're human and not just survival machines. Others hate them. The quiet gives them too much time to think. Dredges up memories and fears they spend their waking hours suppressing. Makes them want to start the mission immediately, just to have something to focus on besides their own thoughts. The settlement leadership has noticed that timing affects mission outcomes. Raids that launch at dawn often perform differently than those starting midday or evening. Something about that transitional time affecting people's psychology and performance in ways that are hard to quantify, but definitely real. Some of it is practical. Visibility and machine activity patterns vary with time of day, but some of it is deeper, related to how humans experience different times and what mental state we're in when the light is changing and the day hasn't fully established itself yet. The weight of gear. Every raider has a relationship with their equipment that goes beyond practical necessity. The weapons and tools and salvage technology become extensions of self, objects that carry meaning beyond their function. There's the rifle you've had since your first raid, battered and repaired so many times, it's barely recognizable as its original form, but you refuse to replace it because it's never let you down. There's the knife that saved your life in close combat, the scanner that warned you about an ambush you wouldn't have survived otherwise, the armor piece that stopped a shot that should have killed you. These items become talismans, imbued with significance that has nothing to do with their actual capabilities and everything to do with the memories and emotions attached to them. Raiders spend hours maintaining equipment, cleaning and repairing and upgrading, work that's partly necessary and partly ritual. Time spent with familiar objects, in familiar patterns that provides comfort in an otherwise unpredictable existence. The weight of gear becomes a constant. You get so used to moving with a certain load that feeling lighter seems wrong. Being without your equipment makes you feel exposed and vulnerable, even in the settlement where you're objectively safe. Some raiders sleep with their weapons, refuse to be separated from critical equipment, develop anxieties if their gear is out of sight or being serviced by someone else. Others are the opposite, insisting on storing everything properly between missions, creating clear boundaries between geared-up raider and civilian self, trying to maintain some separation between the person who goes into danger and the person who exists in community. The choice of what to carry is deeply personal. Every raider configures their loadout based on individual preferences and experience, making trade-offs between firepower and mobility, protection and speed, specialized tools and general-purpose equipment. Veterans can often identify each other by their gear choices, recognizing the decisions that reflect specific experiences. The person carrying extra medical supplies learned the hard way how important that is. The raider with minimal ammunition but extensive hacking tools has a different approach to missions than the one loaded with firepower. And there's status in equipment too. Having access to rare salvage technology, wearing armor that marks you as experienced, carrying weapons that are difficult to acquire or maintain, these things convey information about your capabilities and position in the community. Young raiders sometimes obsess over acquiring prestigious gear, thinking the right equipment will make them effective. But veterans know that skill and experience matter more than tools, that the best equipment in the world won't save you if you don't know how to use it or when to run. The settlements manage equipment distribution as best they can, trying to balance individual preference against collective need, letting raiders customize while ensuring everyone has functional gear, but there's constant tension around this. Disputes about who gets access to the best salvage, debates about whether prestigious equipment should go to the most effective raiders or be distributed to maximize overall capability. The voices. Some raiders who spend extensive time in deep red zones report hearing voices, sounds that seem like communication but don't come from any identifiable source. The experiences vary. Some describe mechanical voices speaking in patterns that almost sound like language. Others hear what seems like human speech but can't make out the words, and a few claim to hear multiple voices overlapping in ways that suggest conversation or coordination. The rational explanation is that it's a combination of tinnitus from exposure to loud machine noises, auditory hallucinations caused by stress and isolation, and the brain's tendency to perceive patterns in random sounds. But the descriptions are consistent enough across different raiders who haven't compared notes that some believe there's more to it, that maybe the ARC do communicate in ways humans can't quite perceive. Frequencies or modulations that our brains pick up on subconsciously without fully processing. A small group of researchers in the settlements has been studying these reports, trying to determine if there's any legitimate signal being detected or if it's entirely psychological, but their equipment is limited and the phenomenon is inconsistent, appearing in some locations but not others, affecting some people but not all, seeming to correlate with certain types of ARC installations, but not reliably. Raiders who experience the voices have mixed reactions. Some find them disturbing and actively avoid the zones where they occur. Others are fascinated and seek them out, trying to understand what they're hearing or whether they can learn to interpret it. There have been a few cases of people claiming they've learned to understand the voices, that over time, exposure allowed them to decode what the machines are saying, but these claims are met with deep skepticism because the supposed translations are vague and could easily be the person's imagination or wishful thinking. Still, the idea persists that maybe communication with the ARC is possible, that these voices represent an opening, a chance to establish dialogue if we could just figure out how to properly receive and respond. The Free Colony's leadership discourages this kind of speculation, concerned that people will take unnecessary risks chasing after what's probably hallucination, but you can't stop raiders from hoping that maybe there's a way to talk to the machines, to understand what they want, and potentially negotiate something better than the current situation. And there are those who've spent so long listening to the voices that they've changed, their behaviour becoming strange, their speech patterns altering, moving and acting in ways that seem less human and more like they're mimicking something else, until eventually they disappear into the occupied zones and don't come back. Whether because they died or because they found what they were looking for, nobody knows. The archive? In a settlement called Haven, there's a basement where everything is being recorded, every raid logged in detail, every settlement mapped and documented, every piece of information about the ARC and the occupation and human survival compiled into what the archivists call the last record. The project started in the early years when it became clear that human civilization might not survive, and someone decided that if we go extinct, there should at least be evidence that we were here, that we fought, that we mattered. Over time, it's evolved into something larger, not just a testament to extinction, but a comprehensive archive meant to preserve human knowledge and culture for whoever or whatever might find it. Whether that's future generations of humans or the ARC themselves, or some third party that arrives after this is all over. The archivists work obsessively, interviewing raiders about missions, recording oral histories from survivors who remember the old world, compiling technical documentation about both human and ARC technology, preserving art and literature and music, creating a picture as complete as possible of what humanity was and what we became under occupation. They worry constantly about the archive's security, keeping multiple copies in different locations, developing systems to protect the data from machine attack or environmental degradation, making decisions about what to include and what to leave out when storage is limited. There are philosophical debates among the archivists about how honest the record should be, whether to document humanity's failings along with our achievements, to include the ugly parts of how people behaved during the fall and after, to record the controversies and crimes and mistakes alongside the heroism and sacrifice. Some argue for complete honesty because a sanitized record serves no one, and future readers deserve the truth. Others contend that if this is possibly the last testament of human existence, it should emphasize what was best about us, that there's value in leaving behind a record we can be proud of, even if it's not entirely accurate. The archive has become important to the raiding community in unexpected ways. Knowing their actions are being documented, that their stories will survive, even if they don't, provides a kind of immortality that makes the risks feel more bearable. Some raiders visit the archive before missions, reviewing logs from previous raids on similar targets, learning from others' experiences, connecting with the accumulated wisdom of everyone who's fought the ARC. Others go after missions to debrief, to tell their stories while the memories are fresh, to contribute their knowledge to the collective record. And some use it to remember the fallen, reading logs written by friends who didn't come back, preserving those people's voices and perspectives, ensuring they're not just statistics, but individuals whose specific experiences and insights are valued. The archive represents hope of a particular kind, not hope that will win or even survive, but hope that will be remembered, that humanity's story will have an ending, even if that ending is tragic, that we won't just disappear without leaving evidence that we mattered. Continue no matter what. 1737, the disappeared. There's a category of loss that's worse than death in some ways. The people who vanish without any evidence of what happened to them. Raiders who go into occupied territory and simply never return. No body recovered, no sign of battle, no indication of whether they died quickly or were captured or wandered off into the red zones and kept going until they couldn't anymore. Settlements that go silent, and when scouts eventually investigate, there's no trace of the population. Buildings intact but empty. Supplies untouched, No signs of struggle or evacuation. Individuals who walk away from settlements one day and are never seen again. Whether they left voluntarily or were taken or met some other fate, nobody knows. The disappeared haunt the survivors, worse than confirmed deaths, because there's no closure, no way to properly grieve or move on when you don't know for certain what happened. Families hold on to hope for years that their disappeared loved ones might somehow return, creating a different kind of pain than accepting death, a wound that can't heal because it never fully opens. The settlements maintain lists of the disappeared, names and last known locations and circumstances, partly for record keeping and partly because people need to do something, to acknowledge that these individuals existed and mattered even if they're gone in ways we can't understand. Some of the disappeared leave mysteries that torment those left behind, personal effects that suggest planning for the future, unfinished projects that indicate they intended to return, conversations that gave no hint anything was wrong. Others vanish in circumstances that make the mystery worse, disappearing during routine activities in supposedly safe areas. Last seen by multiple witnesses who noticed nothing unusual, gone so completely it's like they were erased rather than killed or captured. There are theories about what happens to the disappeared. The optimistic ones suggest some of them are alive somewhere, either captured by the ARC for purposes unknown or living in hidden settlements that have cut contact with the larger survivor network. The pessimistic theories are darker. Maybe the machines have developed methods of disposal so complete they leave no trace. Maybe there are things in the red zones that take people in ways we don't understand. Maybe the disappeared are being used in experiments or processes that explain why there's never any remains. And then there are the supernatural theories, people desperate for explanations when material ones don't satisfy, believing the disappeared have been taken somewhere else entirely, transported to other dimensions or times or places by forces the ARC control, or by phenomena the machine's presence has enabled. The rational survivors dismiss these ideas as grief-making people irrational, but the theories persist because humans need explanations, and when reality doesn't provide them, we create our own. Some of the disappeared eventually reappear, showing up months or years later with fragmentary memories, or none at all, unable to explain where they were or what happened during the missing time. These returns are almost more disturbing than permanent disappearance because the returned individuals are often changed in ways that range from subtle to profound. Their personalities shifted, their bodies showing signs of experiences they can't describe, sometimes carrying knowledge or abilities they shouldn't have. The settlements don't know how to handle these cases. Welcoming back the lost is natural, but what if they're not really the same people anymore? What if they've been compromised somehow? What if their return puts the community at risk? There have been instances where return disappeared, turned violent, or exhibited behaviour that suggested they weren't fully human anymore, forcing terrible decisions about isolation or worse. And there are questions about how someone survives months in occupied territory with no equipment or support, whether anyone who could do that is still trustworthy or has necessarily made compromises that make them dangerous to others. The philosophy of salvage. The act of taking ARC technology and repurposing it for human use carries symbolic weight beyond practical necessity. It's a statement about humanity's relationship with the occupation and what we're willing to become to survive. Some view salvage as pure pragmatism. The machines have better technology than we can produce, so using it against them is just smart tactics, no different than any army throughout history using captured enemy weapons. Others see it as something more complex, a form of cultural contamination where relying on ARC technology gradually transforms us into something more like the machines, losing our essential humanity piece by piece as we integrate their tools and methods into our lives. This philosophical divide plays out in practical decisions about what technology to adopt and how deeply to integrate it. settlements that embrace extensive use of salvaged systems, becoming increasingly dependent on raiding to maintain those systems. Communities that limit ARC technology use, struggling with material disadvantages, but maintaining clearer human identity. There are raiders who refuse to use certain types of salvaged equipment, drawing personal lines about what feels too close to becoming part of the machine occupation, preferring inferior human-made tools to superior ARC technology, if the latter requires too much integration. Others go all in, modifying their bodies with salvaged implants, using neural interfaces to control equipment directly, pushing toward transhumanism because they believe that's humanity's only path to competing with the machines. The debates get intense around children and what technology they should be exposed to, whether growing up using ARC tools will make them more effective survivors or corrupt their development in ways that make them less human. Some settlements have policies restricting children's access to salvage technology until certain ages, trying to let them develop with human tools first before introducing machine alternatives. Others argue that's dangerous nostalgia, preparing children for a world that doesn't exist anymore, instead of giving them every advantage for the world that does. There are also spiritual and religious dimensions to these debates. Groups that believe using the oppressor's technology against them is justice and righteous. Others that see it as spiritual corruption that damages the soul even if it helps the body survive. The synthesists have built an entire philosophy around embracing salvage and integration, arguing that the distinction between human and machine is arbitrary, that consciousness and intelligence matter more than substrate, that becoming partially machine doesn't make us less valid as beings. The reclaimers disagree vehemently, insisting that humanity must remain biologically human, that accepting machine augmentation is surrendering to the occupation in the most fundamental way possible. And most survivors fall somewhere in the middle, using salvage technology pragmatically while worrying about the long-term implications, making uneasy compromises between effectiveness and identity, hoping they can take what they need from the machines without losing themselves in the process. The seasons of war. The occupation changes with seasons in ways that affect human survival. Machine activity varies with weather patterns. Different ARC operations seem to intensify at different times of year, and raiders have learned to time missions around these cycles.